Leadership as a path to inner freedom. A yogic or corporate seminar. Part 1. What is trying to happen here? A look at evolution and the human condition. Part 2. Principles to put into practice. From the art of supportive, creative leadership. Part 3. The reinforcement of the key issues. Training the mind, transforming habits, thinking deeper. Reference to Clarity seminars may be found at ananda.org. Background music by J. Donald Walters. I recently attended a seminar sponsored by Ingram on the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And first would like to thank my workplace for steering us towards such productive endeavors. It has planted a seed to want to indeed contribute to improve our workplace and work with everybody as a team. I have been doing long studying on such subjects on my own, and am inspired to explore with you the cohesiveness to which these studies offer themselves to the topic at hand. To work well with others, we must learn to bring out the highest potential within ourselves so that the level of production will be on a harmonious and high level too. No matter what your position in life is, we are ultimately striving at work and at home toward being free to find and thrive in that potential. We are not free when habits bind us to patterns of behavior that are unproductive. What I love about Ingram is that it is a huge community-minded operation. It has very much in common with the author whose work I will be sharing with you, namely the book called The Art of Supportive Leadership. This author has adhered to 2 particular principles in his life. These are, number 1, people are more important than things, and number 2, where there is adherence to right moral action, there is victory. I passed Jeff Moyer's office the other day and saw a motto on his door that read, "Great things happen when you go for it." And I thought of my mentors here at our corporation, headed by the Ingrams, and how they have sent us out to paint, tidy, build, read to, and donate in every possible way to those less fortunate in life than we are. Dear fellow associates, our moguls are exemplary human beings. How wonderful and how fortunate we are. This means that in being sincere and working hard in our service to others, we have the opportunity to strive toward a life that will assure a true and lasting victory. Being a success also means being open to possibilities and saying yes to life. Perhaps it will please you to know that this author has credentials that are fresh and inspiring, and not at all just from a background in business. He is J. Donald Walters. He led a monastic life and in the 50s studied directly under the Eastern master Paramhansa Yogananda, who wrote the famed autobiography of a yogi. Interestingly, when Steve Jobs recently passed away, he had this book passed out to all who attended the funeral. Donald later became Swami Kriyananda, and far from teaching any fixed religion, focused on many endeavors to improve the world around us in practical yet deeply satisfying ways. His thrust was to help us understand the magnetism and subtle energies that form the nucleus of all outward projections, and how one's focus can be an initiation of purpose into this world. We can intuitively act, and instead of simply reacting to circumstances, can become a cause and not just an effect in this world. He started cooperative communities in the late 60s that are still thriving today all over the world. He has authored 160 books on self-help and practical issues of all kinds. He started the innovative Education for Life schooling system with his Living Wisdom schools and universities, where students consistently test out at the top 5% in the country. He was inducted into the prestigious Club of Budapest among members like Jane Goodall and the Dalai Lama. He founded Crystal Clarity Publishing. His book, The Path, won the Eric Hoffer Award in 2010. Plus, he's written over 400 pieces of inspiring music and has many other accomplishments. Principles are alive, thoughts are flowing things, and dogmatic rules and laws are static and thus not flexible or able to grow. Swami has expressed his views so fluidly on the subject of supportive leadership in the workplace that his enthusiasm is palpable and his common sense answers undeniable. For example, in the course I recently took on 5 dysfunctions of a team, we were told that 2 important steps for a team to become successful was the buy into it step and also the clarify your perspectives step. Swami spoke of the first meetings of members being a blossoming of ideas, inspiring where anything is possible. Everybody thus gets a chance to be heard and feels a part of something bigger than just his or her ideas, something with purpose, something grand. The naysayers and the opinions that won't work are put on hold. Then would come the clarifying stage, after everybody is comfortable with each other and motivated. Fine-tuning on the directions and possibilities are then possible, and the focus narrows to what is more conducive for practical success. Swami said that initially he didn't give some attention to the low energy, lethargic, or negative participants. He focused on those who were in tune with the directives as they were so far laid out. Those who were enthusiastic were the ones he worked with, and his reasoning was interesting. He said that those with energy and enthusiasm created a magnetism that grew finally to draw in all those on the periphery. We will be looking in depth at the framework of this great tool, the art of creative leadership. It has, I believe, the potential to change the very fabric of our daily practices in the world of work and production, and place the focus where it belongs in every level of life. Want to get things done? Do you believe you can do something dazzling and great? As someone aptly put it when someone else doubted his ability, well, others have done this, haven't they? They're human beings, aren't they? I too am a human being, aren't I? One time, Swami went to further the reach of his teacher's organization into India, the country from which he came. It was unheard of for an ashram or school to get permission to build in the designated green district that surrounded the metropolis of Delhi. To even be granted a meeting was almost impossible. Swami was undaunted, though, and finally gained the ear of the daughter of Nehru, Indira Gandhi. She was endeared at his poise and unpresuming kind of charm. She thus set up a meeting with he and her father. When it was reiterated that no such business could adorn the Greenbelt area of Delhi, Swami produced a very aesthetically gorgeous landscape, hand-sketched proposal, showing what a pleasing contribution their hermitage would bring to the area. He was granted his land. Here we go then, learning how to generate magnetism for good in the workplace. I'm here to talk about a book today called The Art of Supportive Leadership. This is by J. Donald Walters, and it's a good instructive book on how to get along with each other at work. The art of supportive leadership can apply to almost anybody. And it's a practical guide for people in positions of responsibility. A little bit about the author. This book was written by J. Donald Walters, and he just passed away last year, 2013, at the age of 86. And his father was very important to Esso, the Esso company, which became Exxon. He was important to them in the early days. They sent him to European countries and he found oil. And so Swami was raised in a business atmosphere. And he went to school in Switzerland and England, and later in the United States. He was very intellectual, very bright. He had a memory of almost perfect recall, and as he often said himself, he sat on a volcano of energy. He just had ideas about everything, and he ended up in the monastic order, and he actually studied under Yogananda in the 50s, and he learned a lot from Yogananda, and he's written on many subjects, from marriage to a system of education that he came up with. These universities and schools produce kids that are in the top 5% of the country. And it's totally unorthodox as opposed to other schools, the way they learn. And I think you'll find this book is very innovative as well. Swami's written about all kinds of things that are practical and helpful to people. The important thing is, really, concerning this book, is that he was able to start cooperative communities in the late 60s that are thriving today. And they have biologically advanced gardening and, like I said, education. And they live together in a harmonious way. And there are many of these throughout the world now, into Assisi, Italy, and India, and many in California and other states in the United States. And he was a good leader. He knew how to delegate, and he could win the respect of people. And when he passed, there are literally millions of people that read his books, of which he wrote upwards of 160. And he composed music that's so beautiful, 400 pieces of music, and different stage plays and different themes, and his music has his magnetism, very calm and beautiful. And he became a Swami. He did some amazing things. So you're getting a different angle here. Someone that he went to all the more prestigious universities, etc., but started this self-study and was a monk and became a Swami. So you're getting an insight here that will be very inspiring to you. And he was able to perceive a lot within himself, and he's able to communicate and share these revelations very well in his books and in his seminars. So that's where I tapped in, was his little book on the art of supportive leadership, because he was able to create these communities that are thriving. They got people that are in all kinds of business, and their Crystal Clarity Publishing, and their web outreach is tremendous, and their retreat centers, and their the exercises that they help people from NASA and all kinds of big businesses, the police force, and all kinds of people that need help with stress have these resources that they use, that started with J. Donald Walters, Swami Kriyananda. So if you're not up on his work, that's a great incentive to do something for yourself. And Google Swami Kriyananda. But yes, it's an art, leadership, because your role in life is to dazzle the world in your way. And everything you do, even if it's cooking supper or sewing a button on a shirt, can be an art. Even when you exercise, your posture, it's an art. You're opening your heart, and you're flowing in a certain way that people can tell from a distance, the way you walk, that you have something that they want. And just as you're painting and you use a big wide brush stroke sometimes, and you can get into the subtler strokes, when you're working with people, sometimes you have to think in those stroke ways. Someone might not be ready to hear something that you would like to tell them, and it takes great patience. And it's good for you to work on patience. If you tell them something that they're not mature enough or experienced enough to hear, it might go right over their head. And then if you try and reinforce it later, they'll just say, oh, I already heard that. You already told me that. So it's an art. You're having a good time with it. You're letting them specialize, letting them grow. Sometimes Swami would say that we brainstormed at first. Anything was possible, just to let every member of the team have an intuition, have imagination, and express themselves. Of course, then later, you would have to narrow it down into practical, what we can do and what we can't do. Sometimes he would even let people make mistakes, and sometimes big, large companies, if their company can absorb the mistake, they will go ahead and let their workers make a mistake in a team effort, because then they will take responsibility for what they did, and it will give them the incentive and the motivation to think a little deeper. What would have worked? And they probably will end up coming to the conclusion that you would have liked them to in the first place, but you let them do it. That's important. Part 1. What is trying to happen here? A look at evolution and the human condition.
The genuine leader is indifferent to praise and blame equally. There are times, indeed, when he knows that he must shoulder an undeserved blame, perhaps because others wouldn't be able to bear the weight of it, or perhaps simply to see an issue dropped as soon as possible, that people might get on with the job. Life will have taught him that the only way to get a job done is to get people to stop reacting, as they tend especially to do when they are blamed, and start acting. Leadership means action, not talk. The teachers of our Ananda school one day asked me how they should handle a pressing problem. The parents of the children, they explained, have so many conflicting theories of how their children should be educated that we simply can't satisfy them all. What should we do? Why not, I suggested, avoid theoretical discussion with them as much as possible? If you give them well-behaved, happy children, I think you'll find them losing interest in mere theories of education. And so it proved. Once the parents found the educational tree bearing wholesome fruit, they no longer cared how the tree was being watered. How often one finds discussion only confusing issues instead of clarifying them. At such times it is better to do almost anything rather than spend further hours pondering the best possible course of action. Planning that facilitates action may save weeks of work, but planning that shelves action indefinitely only succeeds in atrophying and finally killing it. I have known projects that were begun under such a burden of carefully detailed plans and weighty expectations that they could never get off the ground. People who spend too much time talking of what they are going to do generally never end up doing it. It is better not to live too fully on future expectations and save one's strength for present walking.
Somebody in a movie asked a really good question one time. He said, "Are you waiting to talk or are you listening?" And the fella said, "I'm waiting to talk, but I'm trying." And that's really important, that you not cause static in reacting to everything. You're reacting, waiting to get your word in edgewise, when really circumstances are neutral. If you're going to object to something or have to reason something out, there is a third option sometimes, most of the time, and that is to let it be and get out of the box, go beyond that. The time it takes you to react and say, "Oh, I wish that wasn't happening," or "I don't like that," or even "I do like that," the time it takes you to think about all of that strips you of some of the energy you could be using to forge ahead. When you're reacting, it's like static, and your perception to the radio station is impaired by this static. But if you don't react and say, "Yes, I can. I can. I want to. What's trying to happen here? There's a way. What is it?" And you ask the right question, then you are a cause and not an effect. You are, in fact, creating instead of just reacting to what is around you. It seems to me that the best leaders in history and the best artists and the best Einsteins and scientists, no matter who they were, if they did something that hinged on genius or that was enlightening, it seems to me that they were always people that were unattached to the results. There are businessmen that said, "Oh, why not? Let's try it. Just for the love of trying it. And if they lost all their money, well, then there's a lesson to learn." People that had that kind of a resiliency did really well in life. An artist that wasn't afraid to put a broad stroke and then try something new. And it was like writing on water. He set it aside, it was beautiful, and then he wasn't defined by it. He went on to do other things and reinvent himself in other ways. This is a good potential for leadership, these kind of qualities in people. They're not attached to what they have done, and they're always striving to do something more, maybe in another direction. And when you're working on yourself like that, optimistically, and bettering yourself, you can change your habits. It might take a long time. Habits are ingrained over a long period of time. But let's say if you're working on greed or being angry or impatient, and you're having a hard time dwelling on that. Well, somebody wise once said that you can't beat the darkness with a stick, you have to turn on the light. So if you can't confront some of these bad habits, if you're impatient, then try to work on the opposite quality. Try and be generous and giving and understanding. See, you had that energy that was in a whirlpool, a vortex, holding that impatience and greed and grouchiness in there, in this vortex. And that's contractive. That's folding in upon itself, this quality, and becoming tighter and tighter. But a good quality that reaches out to others in service, like generosity, is expansive, and it's tapping into that river that is getting wider and wider and flowing to freedom. Of course, a river goes to a sea, and that's nature. Nature is intelligent. In the animals, evolution is pretty much automatic until they can get the frontal lobe and the function that lets us think for ourselves and think what will make me happy and what's more fulfilling. But up to that point, evolution is pretty intelligent on its own. And it's pretty intelligent even after we get our reasoning faculties. Because that energy is always there. The energy that was bound up in our bad habits of being impatient and all of that. That energy is always there. You can't kill energy. And you can't create it. It gets transformed into this beautiful giving and patience. And so with the idea that you've taken an energy and transformed it, you've taken something destructive and transformed it into something productive, this is how you better yourself. This is how your qualities get more refined and you get more intuitive. Well, my favorite president, President Lincoln, said something that I've just discovered that was really along these lines of thought. He was such a deep thinker, and everything he said was so concise. He would say in a few words something that you'd been thinking about maybe for years. But somebody asked him, "Sir, why do you make friends of your enemies? Why don't you try to destroy your enemies?" And Lincoln gently replied, "Am I not destroying my enemies when I make them my friends?" And so there is no death. There's transformation. Here we are in the material world with all the sense gratification that we feel, bound to this little world in so many ways, wondering why we have to learn these lessons over and over again, getting hurt, and then we go and attach ourselves to the world again, to matter. When matter, scientists have already found that matter is different densities of vibration. Vibration is thought. Thoughts are ideas. An idea, the idea realm, is closer to creation itself. So here we are dwelling on the material things in life, which is pretty much closest to the lowest level. And there's an intelligence to life, just like I was talking about with evolution of animals. Well, there's an intelligence with our intuition as well. And this material plane serves to show us not to be attached to the senses, but to pass through into a more fluid existence, like a liquidy, fluid existence, and up into the fiery state of sureness, of determination, and up into the gases, into the ether, and into the air of pure ideas and pure possibilities. Well, this intelligence, just like in the evolution of animals, when we understand more and more subtly where to turn and where to go now in order to get into the higher, freer realms, away from so much a matter consciousness, there is that intelligence there. We react to situations, but they're neutral. They don't want to hurt us. They don't want to help us. It's our reaction to them that causes the attachment and causes the bad habits of depending on the material things in this world. But if we would learn from what this intelligence is trying to teach us, when you touch a hot stove, the stove isn't trying to hurt you, but the intelligence is saying, we're not meant to be scraping, have this friction against the material plane. The hand is not meant for heat. The hand is meant for creativity. And so we learn not to touch that hot stove, and we learn not to depend on the fleeting sense gratifications that are flying by all the time. We learn to instead strive and belong more to the inner fortitude that we feel. And we feel this way when we are generous and giving, because that's expansive. And we are using the outward world rightly by taking our theories and our ideas of right action and putting them into motion in the world, helping people. And this is not only expansive, but it's magnetic. We are creating a magnetism that, in fact, all our molecules are going in the same direction. And the closer we get to the North Pole, where everything is in line, the more we can be centered. And when you're centered, you're not only above the material state of the world, you're more into a state of lightness and freedom. And you get above the state where duality is, cause and effect is always in motion back and forth. You get above that state. The Newtonian law that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. Well, if you're in a state of centeredness, you don't have to react. So you don't have to react badly or well. You don't give into the wave of euphoria, so there's no trough of depression. And being centered like that is, you're out of the gravitational pull. You're out of the karmic results of your actions because you're at rest in the center. You're not playing the game. You're not in the movie. You've stepped out of the movie and you're watching. And when you refine your own nature in these ways, you have victory over time itself and space, because there's no movement of the pendulum back and forth. No movement. No time from here to there. You're suspended, and instead of reacting, there you are. You can create a new action. You can create fresh, new actions. You are being a cause in this world and not an effect. You are saying, yes, I can. Oh, why not? And you're like the businessman who takes on a venture and he's not attached to the money he may lose. You're saying, oh, I only live once in this body. Let's try it. Why don't we? It'll help everyone. And in these ways, you get more and more subtly developed, and you get more refined in your nature. And you learn how to access that intelligence and tap into it more and more. You learn to ask it the right questions. If you ask the right question, and then you take all of that energy that would have been caught up in reacting to things you didn't like, and you've collected a little bit here and a little bit there, and you're serving people, and you're serving grander thoughts and more pure intuitions and more potentials for good. You're serving. So you have that energy that was bound up in habits, and it's getting into a flow for you. The flow of goodness to the north end of the magnet. You're getting more magnetized. And with this goodness that's rising in you, there is potential to do good in the world. nature knows what to do with the river, doesn't it? The tributaries collect and the flow becomes great. And like I said, it unravels those eddies that were those whirlpools of negativity. It unravels them and they all get in the big flow. And what does it do? It empties out into an ocean of the panoramic view of everybody and everything, where your little wave doesn't matter. In fact, from the distance, you don't even see your little wave or the trough. It all looks level. It is level and even-minded and cheerful. And when you start to think more intuitively in these ways and ask the right questions, then your own resources start to become available to you. Things that you've put into action in the past that are going to cause a reaction, because like Newton's law says, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. And you've put some energies out there that are in the circle that have to come back to you to teach you your lesson. And gravity tells you the same thing, that there is this intelligence. What goes up must come down. And a circuit must complete itself. But when it completes itself, it can be transformed into something higher, a higher octave. And we want to be free in our mind. And as we grow and get older, we want to be unattached to harmful emotions and unattached to worldly things, so that surely we don't think that all the realms, all the heavenly realms, if you think of it that way, everything that exists is bound to a thing you can see, feel, and touch that is a material thing. Surely you must believe that there are realms where we may not need bodies. I mean, sure, you can't kill the energy and you can't create energy. Where does that energy go when we leave this body? What about if we've been non-attached in our lives? I mean, if you were smoking a cigarette after a cigarette and you die, you're going to be wanting that cigarette and you will end up back in a realm like this. But if you were able to set yourself apart and become the watcher and say, well, that little body sure likes to drink alcohol and sure likes cigarettes and really fattening foods and likes to talk, likes cars, different things that are on the grosser level, then you will be coming back to fulfill what you want. Because if you get in a higher realm that's more centered and serene, you might be like a fish out of water. You haven't trained for that. You haven't sat in the silence and learned how to focus your mind and still your mind. And whenever your mind started to penetrate this way and that way and get excited, you didn't bring it back like a swing, trying to stop the swing so you could get off and be quiet. You didn't spend time in your life doing that. So where do you think you're going to go when your body expires? You're going to be kind of grabbing for something similar. But if you said, no, I don't want to be in a movie. I want to make my own movie. I want to create. I don't want to just react to things. I want to create. I want to act from an original standpoint. I want to make my own creation, one that brings me happiness. Well, then you can expect, not only after you die, but even as you grow more mature and more intelligent in your nature, you can expect the realization of this kind of peace in your life. course there's higher realms. I mean, if we think that what happens in this little mud ball of Earth, if we think that that's what happens everywhere in galaxies upon galaxies, then we're awfully small-minded, aren't we? But if we look around us, even on this Earth, we'll see a whole of different ideas in ways of living. If a person was to go and study the life of maybe a hermit, someone who lived very simply, you might find a lot of different habits, and maybe a lot less habits. People who learn to not do everything they want, that way they'll do what they like. They'll do what their body says, oh, that's going to make me relieved and happier, and that's going to make me expansive. So when we get frustrated and we take a fault, like being prone to fits of anger, if we give in to that and cater to it and court that anger, evolution and the creative process will say, oh, this is what you're working on? Well, we will accommodate that. We will help you. And the anger will grow and say, oh, I can do even better than that. I can even be angrier than that. Do you want to see this? And, the same with envy, greed. And you get trapped into thinking, what's in it for me? You get a sense of relief from siding with yourself that you were justified in thinking these ways. But if you instead cling to the higher way, all of these little bad habits and bad attributes that you have, if you instead try to focus them like the many little threads that have to go together to go through a needle, and you focus on bringing them into the flow of good instead of the extremities of pointing this way and that way, the same as the molecules in your magnet. You want them all pointing the north-south direction, so there's power there, and going to the North Pole, not the South Pole, not the creative force that goes outward and gets more and more excitable, but the inner force that gets more and more subtle and settled and silent, so that you can have perspective and have intuition. And you're taking these angers and these bad qualities, and like I said, if you can't work on them, it's too painful, or you're not focused enough, you can at least suspend them a little bit by working on their opposites. Work on your generosity. Do something generous. Do something patient. Listen to somebody. You're suspending that impatience for a period of time and putting it on the shelf. Well, your habit will work in your favor then, because it'll kind of forget after a while that it's on the shelf. It's used to working on this generous project that you're doing now. And that's how you, bit by bit, start to better yourself and start to let this natural intelligence that not only brought us the evolution of rocks to plants to vertebrate to animals to birds, but also is with us every step of the way when we start reasoning and realizing that we're separate from the animals, and we're separate in that we're working on our own faults. Even to the higher level than that, that intelligence will stay with us to let us see, yes, you are starting to see that you are all part of the panorama. We are all part of the panorama. We all make one consciousness. And that consciousness that we're getting closer to again is the consciousness that separated us into an existence in the first place. The potential of thought and idea that it joyfully emoted, but that got into these little eddies and whirlpools of thinking, what's in it for me? And starting to make us unhappy and go in all kinds of wrong directions. In our lower natures, and this is, a little more intelligent than the animals, who might think, I feel hunger, and they instinctually have to do something about it. Whereas, a human will think, I'm the one that's hungry. And then they start realizing they have to do something to quench that hunger. And if they can get with someone who's on a higher level of intelligence, they can be a serf or a worker, a manual worker. And if they're working around somebody like a king or a smart businessman or a kind housewife, they will see that these ways of actions make you happier and get you more of the things you need. And once you're out of the mentality of just working for a reason you're not sure of, then you come into more of a merchant mentality in your evolution, and you start to think craftily. Oh, I could do this and get some money, and I could have money to buy this and that. And you start thinking, what's in it for me? And you don't do things for the good of everyone. You do things for the good of you and for the good of your family. And that works for a while, but then you start getting tired of that because there's no flair there. There's no expansion out of there. So it starts to dawn on you that I want to help other people. Gosh, when I do that, it makes me feel good. It makes me feel better when I give somebody something and they love it than when I get something that I love. And you start to want to protect people, even people in your country. You get more of a warrior mentality and think, well, I would die for this cause. You get idealistic and it's grand. But even that causes highs and lows, waves and troughs. You try to do something good and something negative happens over here as a byproduct of what you did there. And you realize, I want to be free, totally free. I don't even want to be in this movie. I can help people more just by being absolutely untouched by it, because that's the only way people are going to get it. They're going to see someone untouched by all of it, and they're going to sense how they can do it too. So I can't just jump in the water and try and save everybody, because I'll drown too. But if I'm going a path where they can get up and out of the water and not be drowning and follow my example, if I can be free, that can free them. And if you're free in your heart, that translates. People can feel that. And they want what you've got. And so the next level is the level of the sages or the saints or the people that you've known in your life that are free and they're happy and they try to help, but they're not touched by it because they know they can only help if they're the producer of the movie and they can't go and be in the movie. Somebody has to be above the movie. Somebody has to be above the shadows and the light of that movie projector. Someone has to be forging the path that says, we're going to need to leave here too. We've got to get higher. Don't rest. We've got to better ourselves. We've got to be free. We've got to learn to behave so that we don't get into patterns of behavior and habits that will drag us down again. And if we can be free and non-attached when we do pass out of this body, then we won't be grabbing like a fish out of water for this world again will be like a martial artist that realized that tuning his body to a fine focus was not quite as good as being able to tune his mind to that focus. So he stepped it up and he started to tune his mind to that focus. And he's able to concentrate, and he's able to be non-attached and feel free. And he's able to ask the right questions and open up to an answer without having to wade through all the what ifs. He knows how to concentrate and receive an answer. What is it? You know what you want. What is it? It's got to be there. And there's that intelligence that's natural in nature. And you do it enough times, you use your intuition enough times that your intuition starts kicking in and saying, I know what you want me to do. You want me to find an answer for this. So you've learned at the end of your life how to find these answers and how to focus. All of a sudden, your body's gone. So you know there's the brass ring. You know what to grab for. You know that anything that was down in the world, it's all moving at its own pace too. Energy is put into a leaf, and it'll be put into something else later. And when it gets higher and higher and more refined, it'll be a thought and an idea that can carry you into realms that don't need trees and food and gas and cars and those you love, if you were able to help them, will be in those realms too. And you will merge closer and closer to each other, and friends and people will be more in tune with the way you are, because they're the ones that grew into the area you've grown into. So obviously they were learning the same lessons you were learning, and everything gets sweeter and more harmonious because there's more and more love there. It's hard sometimes when you're working on yourself and you're an excitable person, that you've let bad habits sort of take over your life, and you've got to find your way back out of that labyrinth to the simplicity of being able to not think about that if you don't feel like thinking about it. These invading thoughts, you don't want them, and you want the simplicity of just being able to relax. Well, I always found it hard to idle. I found I had to be going in this direction or that direction, and found it hard to be still. Because when I got still, I would become lethargic and lazy, and then I'd be stagnant. And ideas and projects, everything in this world have to be fluid, they have to be flowing. And this is another thing to think about in leadership as well, is that you want to get a project off the ground, even if you're not sure what direction it should go in. You've done the talking, you've done some planning. Now, you don't want to waste energy because you've already thought about these things to a point where you're ready to move on it. And if you don't move on it, then the ideas have no way to be tested. They're untried. And it's better even to start in a direction, even though you're not sure if it's the right direction, than to sit and keep deliberating. You want to start moving, because think of a boat in the water. It's hard to make that boat turn left if you want to go left, or turn right if it's sitting still. What are you going to do? You're going to need a lot of manpower. But if you got it going and it's flowing along, then it's really easy to tip it this way or tip it that way. So get your project started, and then you might open yourself to the intuitions. Should I turn right here? Should I turn left here? Should I go straight a little longer? And take each person as they are. Feel what would be a good way for them to develop. And still your project would come to fruition. And find a way that'll work for the moment. And go that way. And then when a better opportunity comes up, or a different direction, you're centered, you're listening, you're not reacting, you're creating your own actions as you go. You're a cause, not an effect. And you're able to go left or right. You're able to tie up the loose ends. You're able to have a project that you can be proud of. And to have momentum doesn't mean that the boat needs to be physically going, that your project needs to be physically moving along. But in inspiration and in various momentums, I heard of a couple fellows that were sawing a log, and one of them was sawing away all day long, and the other one was taking pauses and sitting down. And at the end of the day, the one that had been taking pauses had sawed way more wood than the other one who just worked incessantly. And he asked him, "How were you able to work so much better than me? You kept taking all those breaks." And he said, "Yes, but while I was taking breaks, I was sharpening my saw." So there are refined ways of keeping things going, and you want to tap into the best way to keep projects lively, inspired, motivated. Everybody has a limb that they're assigned to. Check on your limbs, make sure they're all working well, and if any of them need lubrication, find out what they need. If they need any resources, give them your enthusiasm. And if you're not worried about the outcome of this action or that action, but that you're trying your best because you've got a focus and an end in sight, and you're trying to strive towards that, and you're not attached to blame or praise, then you've got your energy freed up to be able to serve all those limbs and say, "What can I do for you? How are you doing? Oh, come on, we'll do this thing." And I hope for the best in all your projects. And I know I've certainly learned a lot from studying leadership. Maybe I've generated some energy to take on a few projects in my life. I hope so. Thank you for listening. Leadership as a path to inner freedom. A yogic or corporate seminar. Part 2. Principles to put into practice. From the art of supportive, creative leadership. Reference to Clarity seminars may be found at ananda.org. Background music by J. Donald Walters.
A little booklet of mine has just come out. It's called The Art of Creative Leadership. And leadership is one of an infinity of different ways that we can express these teachings. And the interesting thing is that if you can express them well in one way, you can apply the truths that you learn from it to all ways. It will be not only for those whose job it is to lead other people. It will be for those, for example, the most obvious and universal example of all, those who would like to be able to train their own thoughts, how to lead themselves toward the perfection that they're seeking. But its truths are to be found also in any kind of activity where you work with other people, whether in a capacity of authority over them or not, perhaps not necessarily anyway. Because these rules are more people-oriented than job-oriented, they will, I think, prove helpful to anyone, whether in a position of leadership or not, whose lot it is to work with other people. Parents, for example, in raising children, store salesmen selling clothes. Even those who live and work alone may find ideas in these pages, suggestions for drawing the best out of themselves.
He always said that people are more important than things. And that's one of the main points in this book that you'll find over and over again. And also in right action is victory. He always followed the truth, not opinion. He used to often say, I don't care what I think. What is true, what is right. And perfection, he said, is not a thing, it's a direction. So in order to strive towards perfection, it's important to act and not just theorize, but to put a plan into action, and if it's not the best direction, at least it's a direction. And you can develop intuition in these ways, and your intuition will guide you further when it's time to turn left or turn right from the direction you initially thought you should go in. You might get tweaked, subtly tweaked, into a deeper understanding as you go, and it's exciting for teams to be in this together, because they can come upon profound realizations and become closer in these ways.
In the last analysis, the essence of leadership is action. It is not discussion, no matter how intelligent. There comes a point in every debate when the door to further deliberation must be firmly closed. It must be closed even if the subject has not been exhausted, even if it seems that the best possible answer has not yet been found. This point is reached when discussion begins to block rather than liberate the creative flow. At this point, almost any action, short of utter madness, will be better than no action at all. Never allow group activity to become stifled by an excess of words. It may be argued that action, without careful deliberation, may prove not only hasty but harmful. In fact, however, action itself has its own way of clarifying issues. The most important thing in leadership is to keep the energy flowing. As long as it continues to do so, the flow itself will generate ideas, melt away obstacles, open up new possibilities, and create new opportunities. Leadership means action, not merely good ideas for action. Action generates creativity.
Swami said that whenever you are in an endeavor, that you always need to be centered. And this is what he meant when he said, you follow truth, and perfection is a direction. Because when you're centered, you can turn like a skier. You could turn right or left. Let's say your idea was along these lines, and you were going in that direction. Well, if you're centered and a mogul comes along that makes you have to turn left really quickly, you can do that if you're open to ideas and not so opinionized that you think that yours are right.
It is the skier who is already leaning left who falls down when the need suddenly arises to turn right. Strong leaders all have this ability in common. They are centered in themselves, not in the sense of being selfish, but of being always at rest inwardly. By contrast, weak leaders are always those whose commitment to specific lines of action renders them incapable of reacting creatively to new developments. I remember receiving a letter one evening years ago that threatened the foreclosure of Ananda farm. I hadn't time to think, what if we lose the property? Rather, my thought was, there has to be an answer. What is it? Well, as it happened, we passed the crisis, though with only one day to spare. But I don't think we could have done so if any of my energy at that time had been wasted on how I felt about the crisis. Remember then, leadership doesn't mean glamour. It means responsibility. And responsibility means thinking in terms not of credit or blame, nor of how one feels personally about things. It means focusing on simply getting the job done.
If you really want to be a leader, sometimes it's not best to be one. It's best to think about the reasons why you want to be a leader. It's a saying that everybody wants the position, but nobody wants the job. Nobody wants to shoulder a responsibility for a failure. Yet, sometimes you can learn from these failures, especially if you let them have an idea, even though you know yours might be better. And they're really enthusiastic about their idea. It might be a good idea to let them try it. This way they learn to shoulder responsibilities. Of course, if you know it's going to be a really big failure that your company can't absorb, then maybe you wouldn't want to go that far. But to show them that they are on the team and that their thoughts matter lets you give them the responsibility sometimes, and they learn a great deal from that.
I remember a time years ago when I was first placed in a position of authority over others. In the name of humility, I rejected the outward symbols of my position. I refused a title, sat deliberately with those who were lowest in the pecking order, sought for myself tasks that placed me in subservience to others. But by so doing, I found I sacrificed some of the respect and cooperation due my position.
In a leader should be the sense of serving, because a leader is working through all of those that he's with, and so they're the ones that are going to specialize. He is going to get things done through them. So everybody is serving to their capacity, and no one is more important than another.
Because the human temptation is to think first of one's own importance, a safe attitude for you, if you are a leader, will be to remind yourself constantly that the position of leader is not, in the deepest sense, any more important than that of the humblest follower. Both are simply contributing whatever skill they have to the advancement of a project. Often, indeed, the subordinate, because of his freedom to specialize, is in a position to make a more positive contribution than the leader, whose job essentially is to work through others. Indeed, this is the very essence of leadership, giving, not receiving, energy. And perhaps the surest way to ensure such an outward flow of energy is to think of oneself as serving others, including one's subordinates. Leadership means working with people's strengths. As a leader, you will get the best results for the least effort if you work with those who are in tune with your ideals. Don't give a disproportionate amount of energy to those who are not. If you develop a nucleus of people who work well with you and who work well together, others will be drawn into it. The stronger the vortex of positive energy, the more effective will be the work done. You will only dilute that energy if you devote much time and attention to those who are not in tune with it.
he said to work with people's strengths. And oftentimes, he would put someone in a position that they didn't necessarily need to be in because they were better at something else. But it wasn't important for their growth to stay in that position. So he always was thinking and encouraging them to open new venues and new avenues and grow in ways where they maybe weren't as matured as in other ways. And in this way, people could be all-rounded in the end and develop intuition as well as common sense. He said that intuition and common sense were good counterparts to each other, because in developing intuition, you may get ahead of the ball a little bit and think you have more than you do, and let imagination carry you a little too far. But the common sense will temper that a little bit, although you don't want common sense to squelch good ideas. It can be an open kind of a common sense that, not to presume, but lets you go one step further than what you've experienced into the realm of the unknown, so that you can little by little go forward and become sure of yourself in ideas and challenges.
In all matters be ruled finally by common sense, and common sense is that understanding which is born of actual experience. To be given authority over others is to be placed in a position of trust. The wise leader will, if anything, bend over backwards to defend and support his own. For whatever good he can hope to accomplish for others depends first on the strength of his own team.
Somebody who's leading should always be able to be trusted. And in order to be able to be trusted, he or she has to trust. And that way, there's always recourse, because somebody has grown with you and can count on you doing a moral thing and a right thing in their eyes, because they have the experience of a little bit more trust and a little bit more trust. And Swami gave an example of a teacher making the students angry about something, and they complained to the principal, and the principal came down hard on the teacher in order to get in good with the students. And that wasn't necessarily the best step right off the bat without more research, because the teachers were his team. He was part of that team, and those students will pass through, but his team will remain. And the work, in many cases, is the team. The direction and the development of your team oftentimes is the work you're doing. So it's so important that everybody be in tune and on the same page.
For in the last analysis, what counts in an organization is the people working in it, not the work they are doing. If you make those people your priority, you will inspire them to do their best. Never boss your subordinates. Invite, suggest. Give them the freedom to accept or reject your ideas. If they are allowed to reach your conclusions at their own speed, they will be much more likely to get behind your ideas and implement them.
A leader is not afraid of strength in others. If you think about it, that's the way the job is going to get done, because the leader delegates to people who specialize in certain aspects of what needs to be done. And the strength is what's going to get it done.
The wise leader knows that on the strength of his supporters depends the full effectiveness of almost everything he does as a leader. And what if they should cease to be his supporters? What if they should instead become his rivals? If he is a loyal leader, he will attract loyal supporters. Disloyal subordinates, finding no vacuum into which they can move, will soon leave. A good leader indeed will not only develop strong supporters, he will encourage them to develop their own qualities of leadership. He will encourage them to develop their own creativity. For he knows that by delegating authority, he actually increases his own powers of accomplishment. To win support from others, one must give them support.
So if you're worrying about someone getting a foot up on you and doing better than you, you don't really have to worry about that, because being centered, you're not attached to anything on the periphery. And it's like a skier who's very centered can have a course that he thinks is going to be good and fun and worthy. But then, if a corner comes, a bad patch of moguls, he can turn right or left because he's riding the center. He's unattached to either direction and can go either direction as a result. And if you think of leaders that have been magnetic and strong, many times it's people that weren't attached to a direction or to an idea of their own. Swami used to say quite often, I don't care what I think. I care what's right, the direction that shows itself to be morally right and true and honest. Swami said that sometimes your ideas as a leader you think are good, and maybe from experience you know they're good. But if your people are not ready for that yet, they're not at a maturity level or an experience level that they're totally getting their mind around that, then it's best to go at the level they are. You want to take them as they are and work with them there. They're not only encouraged to think more, but they are encouraged to take responsibility for a failure as well as something that went well, because there's encouragement around them and not defeatism.
Be patient. Understand that it takes time to bring people to new points of view. Reflect how long it probably took you to come to your new point of view before you could present it to them.
The other thing he said was to make sure you put ideas into action. At the beginning of a project, he would talk of brainstorming in a way that you could express yourselves and anything was possible. No naysaying at that point and no squelching of ideas, because you had to go past stagnant dogma, rule, and static thinking into something more fluid that was out of the box, that had a possibility of maybe working with what it was the known and what was comfortable. There's always room for betterment. There's always room for improvement.
Deal with each situation afresh as a thing in itself. Don't make too many rules. Rules destroy the spirit.
But having the fluid ideas is so important, because an idea that is in your mind is untried. It's, like I said, it's static, stagnant. Each new opportunity, each new project is a different way of using these ideas, and the outcomes are different. So to be able to delegate is very important. To get those ideas out and get them working. Armchair philosophy does not go very far even if you're going in the wrong direction, it's good to get up and get a start, because if you get the magnetism and the energy going, then you can be steered better. As if you're dead in the water, you can't be steered very well. So if you get rolling, get the ideas up and rolling, and then get more and more sensitive to what direction does it want to go now, what direction would be good. And that's a very good question too. What's wanting to happen here, as opposed to what do I want to happen here? Because what you want may not be the best at this time, just as when you're trying to work with someone and you want to tell them something, it may not be the right time to tell them what you're thinking if they're not ready for it. So you be patient.
In correcting someone, think not only of his need to hear what you have to say, think also of his readiness to hear it. You see, this is for everybody. A wife who has a temptation to nag her husband or scold her children, a husband who wants to tell his boss off or whatever. All these things are to be applied. Think of their readiness to hear it. Wait until the right time to speak, when what you have to tell him will do the most good.
You have to select a time and a place and a person or persons to present. If you bring an idea that's ripe to you, that's not a good time for those who are listening, they will hear it and dismiss it. And then if you want to bring it up again, the first thing that will come into their minds is, oh, we already heard that. And that's a strong habit to break. So you want to introduce a good idea strategically. Think about their readiness to hear what you have to tell them, what you have to try. And maybe it'll be better to wait for a different time, or even to wait for a different feeling of attitude in the room, so that your idea will get rooted and it will grow.
Deal with each situation afresh as a thing in itself. Don't make too many rules. Rules destroy the spirit.
Listening is so important in a leadership role and in a following role, because ideas are so fluid and they change, and different ones will be appropriate for what's happening here. Here are some further ideas, along with some we have discussed, but looked at from a new perspective. It's best to remember, too, not to start with a challenge, but to start with something that they can say yes to, a suggestion that sounds good to them. And in saying yes, there is a momentum started and a good feeling about the project. Whereas if you challenge them at first, they might think that they're supposed to come up with alternatives and something negative to counter. But if you bring out the best in them and expect the best of them, then they'll want to be on your side. And the other thing, too, to think about is that what you're proposing, they might not be ready for. It might be wonderful, and you know it's wonderful, but they are not at a maturity level or an experience level. And after all, you're working with them. Your work is them in many ways, because it won't get done if it's not for them. You are working through them, and they are specializing in different ways, and you're delegating. So in order to have fruition of the ideas that are coming forth, you need to channel them through the people that you're working with. And those people have to own those ideas themselves. They have to be able to get behind them. They have to be able to see them fluidly and clearly. Because an idea is a fluid thing. It is a thing. It's not stagnant and sterile. It needs to be tried in order to get a direction going. Oftentimes, if you're thinking about starting a project and planning a project, it won't really start to have its own wings until you make a move, till you make some kind of moves to get it underway. And you might not even start in the right direction exactly, but whatever you feel is best at the time, make a start, and then as you go further along, you keep feeling what is trying to happen here. And just as there is a flow in nature with the tides going in and out, there's also a flow with intuition and with the energies in the world. And when something is trying to happen, it's trying to happen. If you can channel the best thing to happen, then you're going in the right direction. And you might have to go through a few neighborhoods until you get the right turn to see that you have something in your sights. It's better to fail at your own duty than it is to succeed at someone else's duty. And so that means that if you're pushing people and it's not something that they feel like they can handle or even know, what direction to go in, then it's best to take them where they are and let them try a direction that they can go in and be supportive of that. If you're leading people, then there's always movement and you're always there in support. But if you're driving them or commanding them, then when you stop, it all stops and waits for you to start again. And sometimes when you're leading them, you have to wait for the right time to try and help someone or the right time to say something, because who you're saying it to might not be ready to hear it at that particular time. And so you have to wait and accept them as they are at the moment, because that's what you have to work with. And if you work with that, then you will build the magnetism, the centeredness, and you will draw the people that you need, and the project will grow bigger and better. As a rule, it's best not to start things out with a challenge. If you invite opposition or negativity, then that will set the pace. But if you start with something that everyone can say yes to, yes is very magnetic and it's very liberating, and people like to be able to say yes and then they like to follow through on it. And you'll find that you'll have loyalty with the thought of, yes, we can do this. So then find something that you all have in common and generate an energy from there. It's a good idea in the beginning to have brainstorming sessions where everybody gets to participate and express their ideas. They all feel a part of the team then, and they all feel valued, and their opinion matters. And not only that, you can use your imagination, and you can go out of bounds a little bit and imagine what could be. it's good for inspiration. And later on, of course, you'll need to narrow those expectations down to practicality. But everyone will be, having had their fun, will be ready to get down to serious business to try and put into practice your ideas in a way that will work. So, if you're going to lead people, want to do it. If you want to do it, they will want to do it too. Some people think they might not care to be a leader, and that's fine. A couple of different types of people have been described quite aptly. One being the contented kitten. You set it down, the mother sets it down, and it's content wherever she puts it. It'll look up to her, do what she wants it to, and it trusts her, and it's loyal to her. And the other might be the one who wants to lead. And both are valid ways of living. But even if you're not a leader in your own nature, still, if you're a mother, you lead. And if you take roles in life, there are little ways of leading in everything that you do. And when you do take up the practice of taking charge of something, then you are learning to handle your own thoughts, which is really what we need to do in our lives, is to develop good habits and desires that aren't destructive but that are helpful to our lives. Leadership is a good vehicle to put into practice some of the ideas that you have. So many of the leaders that have done well in the world have been unattached. An artist painted a beautiful picture, and after that, it was like writing on water. It was finished. He didn't care where the picture went. Someone investing big amounts of money on Wall Street had to use common sense, but also the ones that really did well weren't sweating bullets over it. They were prepared to lose that much money, otherwise they wouldn't have put it on the table, and write it off as a learning experience, or writing it off as an investment in finding out how to do it better. It's always helpful to think of roles of leadership and teamwork like an art. It's got its subtleties, things that you have to feel out and think your way through to. If you were like a painter, sometimes you would use a thicker, broader brush and make a broad statement and let that be absorbed by your people. Or other times you might want to make a thin arch. And in thinking creatively and open-mindedly, always remember to have an open heart. And that is also posture. When you're at work and when you're trying to imagine the best way to go and imagine the best realms to use as a base for your work, lift your heart and thrust your ideas from there and from the upper regions of your body. When you see someone walking, sure of themselves and centered, that the centeredness of a steel bar makes a magnet, doesn't it? Rotating intensity of that positive pole makes magnetism. And so it is when you see someone that works from their center and walks and talks, and in their eyes you see that there's enthusiasm and imagination, creativity, and their back is straight and their posture is good. That kind of a person draws people. If you see someone timid or distracted and worried or skittering here and there at work, you don't really focus on them. But when someone has that freedom in their walk and in the look in their eyes, you want to mix ideas with that person. It's not a good idea when leading people to cite your position as a reason that an idea is good, and to say that you're trusted in this position is all right. But rather, it's better to act in a way that will win your subordinates over to your idea by the magnetism in the idea, by the thought you've put into it. It's good to have approval of those who are over you in authority, but it's not so wise to lean on that authority, because then you're relying on an idea that's been handed down or thoughts that have been handed down to you instead of you making them your own. If you've gone over scenarios in your mind and studied them thoroughly, then they're fluid and people will get a better idea, because you're giving them that information firsthand, not secondhand. You don't want people that always agree with you. You want discriminate thinkers. You always want discriminating supporters, because if they're ever asked to stand out on their own, they will be used to leaning on you. And you want to cultivate them to think their own problems through and to think as a team. And when you're striving to help them to think on their own, and you have an intuitive thought that you think might be right, instead of pressing on that, if it's something that is not in the realm of their understanding quite yet, then why not try to bring out their intuitions? And in expressing creativity of thought, they will more appreciate the length that you have gone through to present what you're presenting to them, and they will strive a little harder to get under it and more deeply into it. Swami says that to be a good leader requires a mixture of intuition and common sense. He says that if you rely on intuition and you've not had a lot of experience with using your intuition really deeply, then you might go off a little more into imagination, thinking that it is intuition. So common sense is needed to temper that. But common sense can be seen as squelching an idea too. It doesn't have to be that. The purpose of common sense is more to test the claims of enthusiasm and see if they hold up. Oftentimes, you might think of putting someone in a position that they're really good at, and it might not be what they need. You must remember, people are more important than things. And if somebody has already had a lot of experience in a position, maybe it's someone else's turn. Or maybe they need to try something new. Or maybe they would be a little too sure of themselves in that position. Or maybe they would be a little complacent in that position. It's good to think of what's the best thing for them to be doing right now. And sometimes even the job at hand may be changed, because the objective is, after all, the people that are working. They are the job in many ways. Leadership as a path to inner freedom. A yogic or corporate seminar. Part 3. The reinforcement of the key issues. Training the mind. Transforming habits. Thinking deeper. Reference to Clarity seminars may be found at ananda.org. Background music by J. Donald Walters. Okay, I'd like to talk today about taking on the role of leadership at work and why it's a good idea to do so. If you think about wanting to implement a good idea, then ultimately in the process, you will be developing good personality traits because you're trying to do something outwardly that will help you grow inwardly. Ultimately in life, aren't we all trying to lead our own thoughts so that we're not prisoners to habits, especially bad habits? And a role of leadership, working with a team, can help to bring out those issues, something that might be ingrained that you've been doing, that you could be doing better, and giving it an outlet so that it's not untried in your mind. You can actually take a project and see it through to fruition. A job at work can be an opportunity, a vehicle to take energies that reside lower in you and transform them into more pure, higher energies. If you have a tendency toward laziness or grumpiness, you want to lead your own thoughts to something more conducive to happiness. A job or a project can be a vehicle for you to take lower energies that habit has been courting and thrust them up by enthusiasm into a higher octave, into a more subtle circuit of magnetism, far from the inertia of self-defeating ideas and into the realm of possibility. If you can lead, for example, a tendency to be negative into the realm of positive problem solving, then you can find, for a time, that negative quality is suspended. The energy that was being stored in that vortex can be released and used in the form of an undertaking by the vehicle of enthusiasm. It takes a lot of energy to hold on to jealousy, greed, etc. If you can release that energy, it can be used for generosity and goodwill. Another behavioral fact of nature is evident here too. Different attributes or attitudes reside on different levels of the happiness potential scale. If, for example, anger makes you grumpy much of the time, then you are, to some degree, a servant of your senses, to likes and dislikes. Anything that is unfamiliar to your habits is uncomfortable for you, and you wanting to placate your expectations with that will please your habits in the realms of what you see, hear, feel, etc. In other words, your reactions to things happens in your senses mostly. You tend to be attached to dogmas and rules that work for you. Instead of being a cause, you are always just being an effect, and live in a rather material realm. It is a sort of comfortable inertia. But now, think of your project as an opportunity to take that grumpiness and transform it into an enthusiasm so you can lead your team at work to some new level of achievement. Grumpiness to optimism. See now that your budding optimism is lighter than the grumpiness. The cream is rising to the top. You are out of the realm of senses somewhat now, and the reality of matter consciousness in your life is being replaced by a more fluid reality, a flow of sorts. Your attitude isn't fixed like matter, but rather has already progressed to what in nature would be the liquid state. Can we go farther? Might we explore with our behavior and see if we can enter into the coalescence of gases, and finally penetrate the realm of clear, wide open ether of thoughts? The ether of pure, good intentions? The fact is that habitual sense gratification is detrimental to our health, reduced as we are to reacting to circumstances and forever mounting a new defense, wears out our nervous systems and our bodies. It's kind of like the effect that worry has on the mind. It's like for your car motor to always have the parking brake on when you're trying to go. Yes, we want to get out of the lower body and the limbic system at the back of the brain to the frontal lobe of creativity that started to evolve for us when the animal state and primal humanity evolved into a state that could indeed question, is this action making me happier? Consciousness has progressed through the inertia of dense matter, through the liquid state, gases, to the air. These different stages are symbolized outwardly in nature too, with evolution from the rocks to plants, germs, non-vertebrate, vertebrate, birds, animals, and finally we, who can make choices that can accelerate even nature's rate of evolution by lifting our very thoughts to those realms farthest away from the material world and into the causal, ideational realms. When we say, yes, I can, we are in the causal realm. The freedom of this higher state of awareness is such a relief when in this day and age, the nervous system is taxed so much more severely. With the frequency of interaction people experience today, scientists say that there are perhaps 70 occasions in a day for high anxiety as compared to 5 decades ago when maybe we burned a supper and before computers crashing, traffic congestion, etc. took us away from our centers into the periphery and let us be flung to and fro like a leaf in the wind. When we were babies, we were not attached to things. In fact, probably not attached enough to a bed to know that we were rolling off of one to the floor. Yet, higher realities came naturally. We felt love so easily that we couldn't even really differentiate what material things were. Our surroundings were all part of this love we felt permeating our beings. Then started the rules, such that if someone even suggests that there's a tarantula in the room, your blood pressure could drop. Nothing has changed, but here you are, close to a heart attack. Think of being in a room of people fighting. Then step outside into the bright sunny day. Suddenly you feel free. It's like night and day. Likes and dislikes fling us into whirlwinds of ups and downs. And the excitable ups can be just as torturous as the depressing lows. Yet if we look on all those waves and troughs from the distant, unattached panoramic view, it's all ocean, calm and serene, stretching from horizon to horizon. Level as you please. Circumstances are neutral. They are neither positive nor negative. You place the measurement there, and you can let the circumstances defeat you. And here is an interesting connection. When we think of others, we elevate our awareness from that one little wave that was rising high and falling low into a trough, into the panoramic view where the wave disappears and all the waves blend together in harmony. When we think of other people, we are accessing a wider, broader, higher level of awareness. There's a stability there. There's an intelligence in nature. Just like a river flows to the sea, if we open our intuition, we rise into a flow of awareness. Think of a nice day. The birds are singing and you feel good. You pass a store window and see a new car. Suddenly you want that car. You will work extra hours and scrimp and save to get it. See how you have suddenly placed a condition on your freedom and your happiness. You have now set the rule that your happiness depends on getting a car. Might it be a little greedy to want everything? If you were able to replace the energy to acquire things and use it instead with energy to help others to better their lives, then your enthusiasm is once again lighter than that old energy was. You're not so much into the merchant mentality of what's in it for me. And the more expanded you can think, the more you are opening the ideational flow for intuition. You can indeed change an energy into a better one, leading your thoughts. And this process is largely untried until you take some kind of blueprint of it out into the real world, like a project with other people at work. Yes, you can test the waters of what will and will not work in your own evolution by the gauge of other people. If you can help people, then you can help you. People are more important than things. They make your existence expansive, not a folding in on oneself. To lead people is to inspire them. If you merely drive them, then everything comes to a halt when you're not in the driver's seat. There's no momentum there. No, inspire them. You may have to exercise great patience in order to help someone if they aren't ready to hear something. And your timing is crucial, because if you say it when they are not ready, instead of choosing to do it later when they are in a better position to absorb, they will usually dismiss the same concept simply because they think, I've heard that already, or we already tried that, etc. An idea must be ripe, and your intuition is crucial. Intuition is at the top of the orbit. This magnetic circuit that happens on every level of nature, from the interstellar infinite to the cellular infinitesimal. For a creation, and thus an evolution, to even have been set in motion, a potential was there. An idea got projected and separated from the consciousness that it came from. And there are natural laws in effect on every level of existence. The Newtonian law, that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. The karmic law, and indeed the gravitational pull that offsets the centripetal push. The idea that's separated from the pure conscious thrust created the polarity of north and south ends of a magnet, the to and fro of a pendulum swing, love, hate, the wave, the trough, dualities of all kinds that rallied around the core of the centered absolute. If we can be centered and not attached, stand outside instead of getting pulled into the likes and dislikes, habits and desires, we can generate a clean, clear, causal force. We can be a cause instead of an effect. Stillness got thrust into idea potentials, and those went further outward to become a projection of the consciousness in its dual roles. Living in this world is much like being in a movie. And if we look at it that way, it's much more easy to see how being unattached to circumstances is so much more beneficial. When doing research for this project, I came across a really good seminar that I would like to suggest you watch from Clarity's seminars. It's called Complete Stress and Resiliency Training. And he goes on to talk about how being attached to circumstances is so self-defeating. It contracts your awareness instead of expanding it. He speaks of an example of someone bumping into you from behind on a bus and hurting you, and you want to rage. Who did this to me? And you turn around and you see it was a blind person. Well, the circumstances have just changed, and you're able to release it. Simple as that. Well, everything that happens to us, he talks about being on a Hawaiian vacation, and you've rented the nicest villa, and you're out there by the beach, and you're thinking, oh, if I only had a camera now. Well, I did have a camera, got stolen. Darn. Well, I could get a new camera, but that'll cost me a lot of money, and I didn't get that raise that I wanted. Now, why haven't I got that raise? I should have been the one to get that raise. Not only that, I don't make very much money. And these people around me, my family and friends, are needing more and more. And what am I supposed to do? And it just spirals on. And here you are. You've spent all this money on a beautiful vacation, and you can be just as miserable there as you could be in a traffic jam. So, I'm talking about leading people in a project at work. But really, what it's doing, taking on projects, is putting into practice practices that might help you to learn how to lead your own feelings and thoughts. We think of a martial artist practicing with his body over and over till it's a finely tuned instrument. Well, if we put that much effort into our minds to make them finely tuned instruments, we could focus and marshal our thoughts all into the same direction, just like when magnetism is produced at the center of an orbit. The orbit of us, the orbit of the solar system, it doesn't matter. If we can focus all the energy in a magnet, what happens? The molecules are all pointing in a north-south direction. There's great power there. If we can get all of our thoughts pointing in the same direction and they're not thwarting cross currents with each other, then think of the power that'll be unleashed for good. Lower energy thoughts, greed, envy. Think of envy as being green, and think of anger as being red. Now think of them as being stained glass windows. And the sun shines on all the windows, but when it comes through the red window of anger, it's red, and you're feeling red. When it comes through the green window of envy, you're feeling green, envious. But if you can take those windows away, you can get the direct sunlight, and you can work with that power. It's much more powerful. So it is that when we're not attached to circumstances, we can focus better, and we can gradually take our energies from lower positions, as I was talking about, anger and those kind of feelings are like inertia. If you took creation that got thrown out from an ideational potential through the gases, through the liquid, through the matter, and I guess at the other end, the ultimate would be like a black hole that absorbs, sucks even light. But if you think of being in the inertia, in the rocks, in a black hole, and you're moving back up towards consciousness, in your own self, you're correcting bad habits and desires that are destructive to you. And you think of that anger, it's a habit that you've developed. You fly off the handle a lot. You think, oh, that shouldn't have happened. Well, it was unpleasant to your senses. You heard, felt, saw things that wasn't in your box. It was outside the box of your contentment and your habits. So you didn't like it. Well, if you look inside yourself, if you penetrate inside your thoughts and study them a little more, you'll see that you have settled on quite a lot of dogmatic ideas and rules. They are static. They're not flowing. If you can rise into attitudes that are a little more flowing, even from the matter state into a fluid state. We know now, even science knows, that matter is different levels of vibration. Well, if you're able to get into higher levels that are more fluid, and your thoughts are more flowing and not so fixed, then you're starting to be more free. And like we were talking about, being a cause and not an effect, if you can stop reacting to things and instead create a fresh, new action, an action of your own, then you're even more free. Our reactions to things create static. If we're trying to tune into a radio of intuition, that static gets in the way. We're reacting here, we're reacting there, we're not listening. We're trying to get our words in. We're not being still and letting ourselves be absorbed into the flow. Because just as we see the laws of nature on every level, evolution happens with the animals automatically, and they progress. I mean, there's more and more intelligence as evolution progresses. Well, the same is true when we finally start using our frontal lobes and we're able to see that we can do things to make ourselves happier. And the closer we get to the creational absolute, the more we have control of what we do and what happens to us. We don't have to be invaded by thoughts when we don't want to think them. We can just go into the center in the stillness that we have within. It's like a skier. If he can stay in the center, then it doesn't matter if he's thrust left or there's a mogul to the right. He can go either way. He's suspended in the middle. That freedom is there. Just like the middle of the pendulum doesn't have to go down or down the other way. We can be like that in our non-attachment. Now, when man is more primal in his thoughts, then you might think of it as being like a servant. You would grow by learning from other people, seeing the integrity of somebody you might be working for. And if you progress and evolve, you would get to the stage where you would be like a merchant. You would become crafty and see, oh, I could do this and that would benefit me. So it's more like, what's in it for me now? But then you get tired of doing everything for yourself because it's not really liberating either. And that would bring you more into a stage that some cultures would call the warrior stage or the soldier stage, where you would do something for your country or your family and stand up for your rights and make sure that everybody is treated well, not just you and not maybe even just your family. And then you can expand from there and see that when you care for everyone in the world, you are at a stage that we were talking about. There's an intelligence to the flow. The river flows to the sea. There's an intelligent force when your magnetism gets strong and your molecules are all pointed in the same direction, and there's power in that circuit, and you get higher in your thoughts and more pure and more innocent and more unattached. There is an intuition that you can tap into that is intelligent. And in any circumstance, let's come back down to you're leading people at work, and you think to yourself, what is trying to happen here? It's not what I want. We have an end in sight, something that we need to do, a project. What is trying to happen to make that come to fruition? And if you can open up and let the intuition guide you more than the static reasoning, like we were talking about, then you will be guided in uncanny ways. You know it's so. If somebody asks you a question and you don't know, but you try to conjure up an answer because you want to know, so you're thinking and you can't think of the answer. But if you had said, I don't know to begin with, and released it and opened up, more often than not, the answer will drop into your head, right? Or you might get an answer in your dream or in your sleep. There is an intelligence in nature, up through the plants and animals, and through the gases, and into the ideational state. There is a process to everything. And with the animals and the plants, they don't have the frontal lobe. They can't think, is this making me happy? How can I better myself? But by the time one has progressed and is in the human form, you're conscious of being separate, enough that you can find reasonable common sense answers. And evolution has been pretty much natural up to that point. Evolution has progressed, and the animals have gotten smarter. But a human is intelligent enough that they can make mistakes. There's a million mistakes you can make thinking about yourself, and you can digress that way. But if you can continue your own evolution from that point, and being non-attached is a big part of that, wanting to see the good for the whole, seeing the panoramic view, you can transcend the material state in a sense, and hopefully after death, because who wants to be in the material state? That's next to the lowest. We want to get into the ideas and the thoughts, and even above that into pure feelings of love, generosity, things that are light, things that are flowing and rewarding. So all that to say, if you're in a role of leadership at work, try to expand. Try and help people to develop what you have found out in ways that will help them. If you're talking to someone, talk to them at their level. Try and speak from your heart to their heart. Your experiences aren't necessarily going to help them, but your listening will. it will be open and expansive. And if their habits are to want to get a word in edgewise, they will be relieved by someone who is relaxed. And it's a great growth mechanism. So there are many ways in this life that you can grow, at work and at home with your family. And if you're able to be like the martial artist and go into the silence sometimes and just feel where you are and try and forge those pathways that are going to let you be more and more free. You can focus your energy and find that you have an amazing amount of energy. All the energy that was holding bad habits and angers and grudges in vortexes all along your spine. If you can create a river that flows so strong that it pulls those eddies, unravels them, and they get pulled up into the wake, think of the energy that you can put into a project. My other source of inspiration for this talk, I have already told you about the Clarity seminars. My other source of inspiration is a book called The Art of Supportive Leadership by J. Donald Walters. And he became a Swami. He did some amazing things. So you're getting a different angle here. Someone that was born into the business of, his dad was a geologist for Esso, which became Exxon, and found oil in Europe in the 20s and 30s. And he went to all the more prestigious universities, etc., but started this self-study and was a monk and became a Swami. So you're getting an insight here that will be very inspiring to you. And he was able to perceive a lot within himself, and he's able to communicate and share these revelations very well in his books and in his seminars. He started communities that are thriving all over the world, that he started in the 60s. And so that's where I tapped in, was his little book on the art of supportive leadership, because he was able to create these communities that are thriving. They got biologically advanced gardening and people that are in all kinds of business, and their crystal clarity publishing and their web outreach is tremendous, and their retreat centers and their the exercises that they help people from NASA and all kinds of big businesses, the police force, and all kinds of people that need help with stress have these resources that they use, that started with J. Donald Walters, Swami Kriyananda. So if you're not up on his work, that's a great incentive to do something for yourself, and Google Swami Kriyananda. But yes, it's an art, leadership, because your role in life is to dazzle the world in your way. When you leave this world, you will be so much freer. And you will have helped a lot of other people to get out of their little box and into the realm of possibility. Thank you.
To allow the imagination leeway like this is the only way that the mind can develop the freedom to be able to find new possibilities that are really true. A scientist who is able, that's what they do with brainstorming sessions. They say, don't be critical, just talk. Come up with ideas, suggestions. And it doesn't matter if they're no good, don't exercise your critical faculty, because that paralyzes creativity. The time for criticism comes later. So now just think, come up with ideas. The more harebrained, in a sense, the better, because that sort of frees you from the shackles of conventional wisdom, and in that way you may come up with some far out but absolutely valid discovery. Later on you can sift through it critically and say, well, that obviously wouldn't work, but sometimes there's a real pearl there. Well, that is the way the creative faculty works. And so to entertain the possibility of the absurd is a necessary step on the path toward finding truth. A very interesting experience, which I've shared with many of you, was 2 or 3 months ago when my father died. And my mother phoned me, and I was lying in bed, and after I heard that he'd died, I sort of mentally tuned into him, and I could feel his consciousness. It was a very interesting experience, because we hadn't been that close. He was very dogmatic in his scientific approach. He had no interest in talking about the whys of things, the deeper meaning of things, the philosophy of things. He just, anytime I would say anything like that, he'd sort of put it down. I had a lot of respect for him. He was a fine person. But we didn't share interests. We had none of those things in common. One time, I asked him if he had read a book of mine. And he said, no. And then he went on, have you read an article I gave you that I wrote? No. He said, well, you see. That's how it was. It's too bad, but it's how it was. When he died, I felt a consciousness that was very separate from all the things that he'd done, the self-definitions that he'd acquired, the beliefs that he was very firm in his beliefs. I know how absolutely convinced he was that we'd never land anybody on the moon. It was scientifically impossible. Of course, he had to adjust to the reality when it happened, but he was dogmatic in his way. And yet this energy that I felt behind that dogmatism, which is what I felt that morning, was of a very fresh, strong energy, which he had put forth in overcoming the obstacles that he had to face in his life. Very honest, very honorable, very vigorous and courageous. He was all of those things. And that was what he had gained in his lifetime. And those other self-definitions were stripped off. They weren't the real he. Nor are you what you seem to be to your friends, in the sense of your self-definitions, your ideas, and so on. Those things are stripped away. It's the energy flow, the state of consciousness that you have developed, that you've acquired by acting as you've acted, that you will carry with you. The fact that he did everything that he had to do with a very clear mind made his mind even clearer when he died. And I could feel it very strongly as it was when he was a young man, when I was just a child, a little toddler. But it was more than that. It was more vigorous, more fresh, as if he had gained in this lifetime in that direction. But that's who you are. That's what you'll take with you when you go. And this personality will be really just a memory. Your personality is the superficial you. Underneath that, there are these basic attributes of courage and dynamism or weakness, and the opposite, depending on how you act. When you face a test, do you meet it and try to overcome it, or do you think, oh, well, gee, it's too much trouble? These things determine the quality of your energy, the strength of your energy. All of that is what you really are. So that is you, which is somewhat behind the scenes and directs what's happening on stage. But the real you is that which is behind the scenes and watches all this play. And again, you really are out of time. It's a fascinating subject. How long does it take for us to achieve this knowledge of what we really are?